I was a junior doctor. What on earth are you doing, Dr. Shaw? Dr. Holden screamed at me. I gulped nervously. I was just doing the rounds. Am I not supposed to be doing this, Dr. Holden? The man floundered, searching for a response. You're supposed to do whatever I say you're supposed to do. I nodded. Yes, sir. Sorry. Tensions have been a little high in light of the excessive cardiac arrests in the ward, so Dr. Bradley said, Well, I don't care what Dr. Bradley said, Dr. Holden spat. This isn't his ward, it's mine. I nodded again. Sorry, sir. Are you going to be doing the rounds then? Dr. Holden raised an eyebrow, surveying me with cold eyes. Are you the anesthesiologist? Dr. Holden asked. I lowered my head. No, sir. No, you're not, Dr. Holden said. So I'll decide when and how the round should be done. Go and take your break, Dr. Shaw. I'll take it from here. I nodded, swallowing the lump that had risen in my throat, before scurrying out of the room. My fellow junior doctors were already complaining about Dr. Holden when I met them in the break room, and I was relieved to have an outlet for my frustrations. He's losing it, Stacy said, and he feels Dr. Bradley breathing down his neck. Any more cardiac emergencies, and there'll be an investigation, I reckon. The man's incompetent. He always has to do everything, Thomas moaned. How are we supposed to get experience if he keeps taking the reins? The grunt work is supposed to be left to us. We were all a little stressed. The unusually high number of cardiac arrests did not reflect well on any of us. I didn't want my career to be hampered before I had even got started. Not that I believed myself to be at fault, but the truth was that none of us knew why there had been so many deaths on the ward, and standing in the break room wasn't helping. My mind was wandering. I had to get back to work. So I returned to the ward from which I'd been banished, and I loitered in the hallway, peeking at Dr. Holden through a small window. He was checking the IV bags of the patients on the ward, as he'd promised, but I caught a glimpse of something that left my stomach in knots. He was injecting an identifiable substance into one of the bags. My heart started to race, as I was forced to accept the possibility my mind may, in fact, be a probability. Dr. Holden was interfering with the treatment of his patients. Did that have something to do with the increasing cardiac arrest on the ward? I didn't want to believe so, but things were adding up. Perhaps the doctor's unnerving demeanor had something to do with it. He'd always frightened me, and I certainly had an explanation as to why that might be the case. And when I was stirred from my daydreaming by the door opening, a terrifying figure loomed in the doorway. Dr. Holden, smiling broadly, looking more jovial than I'd ever seen him. May I help you, Dr. Shaw? He asked coldly. I shivered. I only excused you for a break 10 minutes ago, he whispered. This seems unusually quick for you. You're usually eager to get away from the floor. How long have you been on call? I tentatively met the man's eyes, two blackened balls surveying me with pure malice. I'd always been the one to give him the benefit of the doubt when the other junior doctors complained about him, but I'd uncover his secret. And when I glanced at his hand, I saw the bottle of whatever the doctor had injected into the IV bag. My keen eyes noted the label. I saw enough of it to know that it read bupivacaine, a nerve-blocking agent, something that had no business being given to those patients. And, if mixed with other things, which I would later learn to be the case, it could develop a deadly cocktail. The type of cocktail that might lead to a patient's cardiac failure. Earth to Dr. Shaw? Dr. Holden snapped. I asked you a question. How long have you been on call? I have to go, I whispered, face as white as a sheet. In retrospect, I wish I kept a poker face. I wish I'd been smart and hid the fear in my eyes, but I wasn't thinking in that moment. I was acting on survival instinct, and that instinct did not bring out my logical side. And I could see in Dr. Holden's eyes that he finally understood. He knew that I knew. As I turned to flee, the man seized my wrist and offered a haunting smile. You didn't see anything, he cooed softly. It was all in your head. Please, let me go, I whispered, wrestling with his grip. This isn't about you. Dr. Shaw, he hissed. It's about that bumbling fool, Dr. Bradley. Well, if he wants to get me fired, I'm taking him down too. And we all know that he's been trying to claim this ward. Imagine how that'll look when the authorities connect the dots. All of the deaths from the tampered IV bags, and Dr. Bradley will be left to take the blame. You're a maniac, I cried. A maniac? No, I'm saner than most here. Let me show you something, Dr. Shaw, he chuckled. I screamed as he dragged me into the ward, and the deranged experimenter, as he would call himself in a later court trial, yanked me over to a patient's IV bag. He began to roll up the sleeve on my scrubs as I wrestled with him. This will make you feel better, Dr. Shaw, he promised, giggling as he prepared to hook me up to the tainted bag. I was saved, with seconds to spare, by a security guard who heard my scream. A guard who just so happened to be patrolling the corridor at the right moment. He ran into the room, startling the doctor, and the two scrapped whilst I called for help. Dr. Holden never gave me a human explanation for his crimes. Experiments, that was what he called them. He wanted to see what he could do to human bodies left unattended. He wanted to see what they could endure. But he also, it would transpire, wanted to see how long it would take for somebody to notice. Very good, Dr. Shaw, he laughed as he was dragged away. It happened at a playground that my mom used to take me to almost every other weekend. We would always park on the east side of the park near some of the newer equipment. Usually there was never anyone at the park except a few other families, and on the day it happened, this is exactly how it was. You look to be about my son's age, he offered. I didn't respond at first. I was waiting for my turn for the swings. You should go find him. He is just over there, he commented, and then shouted out, Jeffrey! Jeffrey? None of the kids in the area responded. The man huffed and smiled at me in an apologetic way. He's probably playing hide and seek. Plus, he is so shy around pretty girls. Maybe if you told me your name? The man suggested. At this point, I didn't want to be rude, and I just figured that I could at least tell the boy I couldn't see my name. It's Alyssa, I squeaked. Speak up, dear. I doubt anyone could hear that, the man commented. His demeanor was strange, but that wasn't what worried me. I recall thinking to myself that I couldn't see my mom, so for some reason that baffles me. I decided to trust this man. I can't find my mom, I told him worriedly. Oh, well, come with me and we can look for her together, he suggested. On this side of the park, there were only a few other adults, but none of them were really paying attention to me or this stranger. Maybe she had to run to the car to get my inhaler, I said out loud. Each second I couldn't see her, I was becoming more and more anxious. The man seemed calm and guided me toward the sidewalk that went to the west side of the park. Asthma? Do you have that as well, Alyssa? He sounded concerned, but I had no idea why. I didn't realize what dark scheme he had in mind. No, I can run circles around my mom, I said. Good, that's very good. He looked toward the west side of the park, where a road ran toward the back of the old high school, and commented, You know, I actually work at that hospital. I bet I have an inhaler in my car, he said, pointing to an old SUV. This should have been my red flag, and I do remember saying that I should go try to find my mom. But then he firmly grabbed my hand and said, We should go look for that inhaler first. What if your mom needs it and you're too late? That scared me more than it should have, but I obediently listened and didn't resist. I was a gullible, concerned kid, being led to the back of his SUV like a sheep to the slaughterhouse. He popped open his back door and I saw a mangle of medical supplies, including what I recognize as several bags of blood and other prescription drugs that didn't seem like something he should just have lying around in the back of his car. Then I saw his son, lying nearly unconscious behind the piles of medicine and hooked up to an IV drip. I froze, seeing his pale skin and hollow eyes. He didn't look well at all. What happened to him? I whispered. He pushed me into the trunk of the car and placed something over my mouth that made me feel dizzy. It wasn't quite strong enough to knock me out, but I couldn't really stand up straight. He then laid me down across the way from his son and whispered, "Jeffrey used to be able to play with the other children just like you, but now he's all alone. And that's not really fair, is it?" I could hear a faint hint of fear and desperation in his voice. His right hand fumbled for something amid the junk, and I saw a gleam of metal as he began to take my clothes off. I screamed. I was sure the stranger was about to violate me, but what came next was far worse. "It would be easier if you were awake and docile," he said sternly as he found a syringe and plunged it into my arm. I immediately felt my arms and legs go numb as I watched the medicine go into my body. I remember gasping, and the stranger tried to keep me calm. "Your heart is slowing down, Alyssa. It will be fine. It will only be temporary, I promise." He reached for the scalpel that he had a moment earlier and began to talk about what he was planning to do to me. "When Jeffrey started to get sick last year, I thought we could turn things around. The prognosis was good. They said he would just need a few infusions of blood, and he would have a healthy heart again. I didn't even worry," he said as he cut directly into my right shoulder. I could still feel the pain, but now I wasn't able to even utter a sound. Whatever he had given me left me paralyzed, a puppet for him to cut open. Then they promised he would be placed on a short list. "It won't take long, and he can get surgery," they said. But I have been doing this for years. I have seen kids younger than him die because there aren't any candidates available. I was starting to black out as blood trickled down my chest. "I'm sorry that this had to happen to you, Alyssa. You seem like a good kid. But maybe if your mommy had paid more attention to you, you wouldn't be here now." The world was dark now. I could still hear and feel, but could hardly breathe. It wouldn't be long that I would be gone. The next thing I heard was a loud bang. Then my mom was shouting and hitting the man over and over. I was starting to come to. Some part of me was realizing that she had come to save me. I saw him try to attack her, but my mom was relentless. He went down after just a few more blows. Then she was calling 911 as I passed out. I got quite a chewing when we made it home that evening, and I got a few stitches to remember my encounter with my abductor. A police officer at the ER filled in the blanks for the man's story. "That's the third shift surgeon that got fired last month, isn't it?" I remember overhearing as I waited to be seen. "Yeah, I remember he abruptly quit when they diagnosed his kid. Poor guy. He just wanted to save his own son." Surprisingly, the surgeon had managed to escape before paramedics arrived, and we never saw him or his sick son again. I like to think they had a happy ending, not because I think they deserve it, because if they didn't, I had the feeling this madman might still try to hurt others again. Even after all these years, I don't like going to that park alone. Grandpa fell ill during the early days of COVID, a dreadful time for everyone. But it was particularly dreadful for the care home residents and their families. We weren't allowed to see Grandpa for long stretches of time. "I want to leave this place," Grandpa growled. "I want to go home." "I know," I sniffled, and my dad rubbed my back. "We're here," my father told him, "and we'll always be your home, Dad." "Is that you, Ernie?" Grandpa asked. Dad sighed. "No, that's your brother, Dad. I'm your son." Grandpa frowned. "I don't have a son. Far too young for that. Don't even have a wife yet. Are you okay, Ernie? Not bumped your head, have you?" We both tried telling Grandpa that he was living in his new home. He would only forget moments later. And besides, it seemed only to upset him more greatly when he realized that the care home, which he viewed as a hospital ward, was his place of permanent residence. But at least he had Martha. That was what Dad and I told ourselves. The jovial nurse was Grandpa's favorite person in the world, it seemed. She was attractive, so I'm sure that he had some part to play in it. Dad and I would joke that Grandpa would be grumpy and untalkative with us, but he'd lit up like a lamp when Martha entered the room. "Hello, honey," he'd smile, and Martha would smile back. "Hello, Gerald. You're looking exquisite today," he once said. It was sad, really. Dad pointed out that Martha, with her red hair and fair skin, looked quite similar to his mother, a woman I never met. She died before I was born. So it seems likely that Gerald viewed Martha as Dad's mother, even though he never mistakenly called her by his wife's name. "Sorry about Dad," my dad awkwardly said. "You're very patient with him." "Oh, please," Martha smiled. "He's actually polite to me, Mr. Thorne. And that's the most important thing in a place like this. It's why he's my favorite. He'll always be my favorite." What a strange line for a nurse to say. Then again, my grandfather was a strange man. It seemed fitting that he get along with another oddball. I was simply grateful that she hadn't kicked up a fuss about the time that Grandpa squeezed her buttocks. "I'm used to it," she smiled. A week later, we found ourselves in another state of lockdown. Dad and I were stuck in our individual homes again, itching to see Grandpa. But the next time we did, he was not well. "Your dad's not well," Martha had told my father over the phone, and we rushed straight over. But when we arrived, he seemed his usual self to me. It was Martha who seemed really unwell to my eyes. Her smile seemed so uneven to my eyes, and Grandpa only seemed to worsen when Dad and I returned from the dining room with 2 chairs to seat ourselves in his room. Suddenly, Grandpa's breathing was labored. "What's wrong with him?" Dad cried. "He's been like this today," Martha said monotonously. "It fluctuates." "Do something," Dad screamed. Martha nodded. "Right, I'll call an ambulance." But Grandpa passed before the paramedics arrived, and whilst Dad sobbed on the bed, pushing off the paramedic who tried to console him, Martha was standing in the corner of the room again, observing the situation, watching us with curiosity, like some foreign thing studying the behavior of humans. As it would transpire, from the official investigation into my father's death, Martha had injected him with 50 shots of insulin. He was not diabetic, and she gave no explanation for her terrible act when tried. Dad and I yelled at her to explain herself. We fought and fought for answers, but Martha had nothing for us. We don't know why she injected Grandpa with the insulin. All we know is that she was not human. Not in the way that we might understand. Why did I do it? It's obvious, isn't it? I didn't want to see him suffer anymore. The nurse sniffled, but she was smiling. It seemed merciful to put him out of his misery. "What you did was anything but merciful," the judge said. "He'll always be my favorite," Martha laughed as she was taken out of the courtroom.